Yes, we are. Hello, hello, hello. Happy Amazing Tuesday. This is Dr. Sharon, educator, author, entrepreneur, and speaker. And I am the host of the Leadership Matters with Dr. Sharon. I'm so excited to have my guest. We've been trying to do this now for a couple of months, so we finally got it worked out. My guest is Sharif El-Mekki. He is the principal at Mastery Charter School, Shoemaker campus. He's also the founder and co-chair of the Fellow Black Educators for Social Justice. Fellow Black Educators for Social Justice. Yes, I said that correct. And so I would just like to say, Sharif, welcome to Leadership Matters with Dr. Sharon.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, and thank you for your patience with a busy schedule.
Absolutely,
so we're able to coordinate.
We are all busy, so I totally understand. I just gave just a very brief introduction for you, but I would love for you to take the time to share who Sharif really is and all the wonderful things that you do.
Well, thank you. I'm a son, father, husband. This is my 25th year working in Philadelphia schools. I was 15 years in the school district, and this is my 10th year at Shoemaker campus. I'm part of the Mastery Charter Network here in Philadelphia and Camden. And as you mentioned, we began an organization to support current and aspiring Black male educators called the Fellowship Black Male Educators for Social Justice. And yeah, that's where I am now.
Okay, wonderful. And so I want to start out by asking you, first of all, about Shoemaker. Tell us about your school, what's unique about your school, and all the wonderful things that's going on at Shoemaker.
Yeah, so I absolutely love Shoemaker. It's in the same community that I grew up in. It used to actually feed the high school that I graduated from. So it's a turnaround school, and this is our 12th year in existence. We started off as a middle school, and we kept adding a grade. At that point, the superintendent, Paul Vallis, had asked Mastery to partner with communities and turn around a series of schools that had been struggling for generations. And Shoemaker was one of those schools. So it's the third oldest in the Mastery Charter Schools network, and it is the first neighborhood or community school that we partnered with the community of Parkside, Carroll Park, and Winfield, and turned the school around. So this is our graduating class. First graduating class was 2011, and we are a 7 to 12 school, and we're excited about this next graduating class, 2018.
That is so exciting. And, you know, with the Charter Network, and you and I were actually talking before we went on live, what are some of the differences that you've experienced? Because you've been in just a public school, and now you're in the Charter Network, and you've sort of done the in-between. What are some of the differences that you have experienced now just being in the Charter Network?
Yeah, I think every charter is a little bit different. I think what our network, Mastery Charter Schools, allows us to do is one, turn around schools effectively, and so partner with communities in a way that gives them, we're really pursuing educational justice and trying to make sure that the students are safe, that they are able to be successful in their post-secondary plans and live up to the aspirations that the families and the children have for themselves. I think what I've also found is just a even higher level of accountability, which we wholeheartedly embrace, but also the autonomy. But it's like having what you ask for, you have to be careful and respect that what it is, and so that a lot of people ask for higher levels of autonomy, but you also have to make sure that you're embracing higher levels of accountability as well. They should dovetail together.
You're exactly right. And so now that you're in this turnaround school, and we know that there are challenges with a turnaround school,
right?
How are you really knocking down those barriers? Parent involvement, school culture, all of these things that plague turnaround schools. What are some of the things that you've put in place since you've been there since 2008? So we're talking 10 years, right? So that's an awful long, an awesome long time. How have you broken down those barriers?
Yeah, I think one, we're just really, I think the partnership with families is probably the most important aspect of being a turnaround. If you're in a turnaround in Philadelphia, that means you're in the bottom 10% of schools. And so I don't even think it was like a lack of parental engagement. I think parents had just, grown so frustrated over the years. One, it was just building up trust. And so that they trusted, like, you know what, like, you're going to respect me, you're going to respect my child, and you're going to respect the partnership. And I think that, approaching it with a level of humility to say, like, you know what, we're actually here to serve, and we are here to partner. And I think that's the biggest, has to be the foundation and the DNA of a turnaround, that you're coming in to provide a service, and you approach the work with humility and vigor, to really pursue those goals that families have. And I think that's how we started. And the second piece, I think, you have to have top talent. You have to make sure that it's everybody, not only the teachers, who obviously are the most important in our adults in our building, but also even everyone from the front desk staff to the custodial team. Like, everyone has to really believe in kids, believe in the work, and believe that they are there to serve. It's not a job. It is like, this is a mission. It's pretty much a lifestyle to work on behalf of children and families and communities.
That leads me to my sole question that I'll always ask on this show. This is Leadership Matters. Why, in your opinion, does leadership matter?
Yeah, leadership matters, I think, because things just don't get done without people stepping up to the plate. And whether it's a teacher leading a classroom, whether it's peers leading peers, and I think the leadership is where people say, like, you know what, I am accountable. The buck stops with me. And when you have leaders in your building, there's a whole lot less finger pointing. And it's a whole lot of, handshaking and lifting together. So, that whole idea of lift as you climb, it doesn't mean that, I'm leading and everyone just follow me. Like, leadership is far more dynamic than that. And often as a leader, you're actually a follower, and you're following, the team. You're receptive to feedback from a variety of stakeholders. And I think, the part of leadership, it's often people that aren't even pursuing it, but they have it within them. And I think part of our job is to look for those, find those, and elevate those leaders, whether they be students, staff members, whoever in the community.
Exactly. And right now, my current space in education is that of a leadership development coach. So how do you intentionally develop those around you, be it your assistant principals or perhaps teachers into teacher leaders, and then eventually moving them on up to administrators? Because I can imagine in 10 years, you've probably had some movement. So
yeah. Some of it's painful. I support our leaders, and as some folks, it is sad to see them go because they meant so much to the community. But I also just believe that it's really important, and that's what was done for me as a teacher leader, assistant principal. Like, people were always invested in me, and so I think that's the number one, to really invest in folks, find out what their passions are, what they want to lead in, and also recognize and respect that there are different aspects of leadership. Like, leadership doesn't always mean that, oh, now I'm going to be an administrator. Some of the best leaders I've ever met were actually, they still teach, and they, but how they impact and how they influence, their sphere of influence goes well beyond their classroom. And they're actually, because they're such leaders, their students become leaders, and their students impact. So it just becomes this ripple effect that can just have just this synergy throughout a building. And so that's really fun to watch. It's fun to support, and it's an honor to be able to support people on their path. As long as they're pursuing educational justice in a variety of different ways, I just really pledged to help them in any way that I can, whether it's modeling, whether it's advice, whether it's hey, yeah, show me how you did that. You know, some of it is really learning from them. So some really talented people around. I think that's a principal's number one job. It's a saying out there that, you know, good leaders don't create followers. They create, you know, they support more leaders or something like that. I'm butchering it, but you know,
exactly
you get the gist of it, you know.
Exactly. And so now let's shift to the fellowship, because that's really, you know, that's a huge undertaking. So the fellowship focuses on Black male educators. So
Right.
just walk us through this whole, because you actually founded this, you're co-chair now. So just really take us through the creation of this, the rationale for, and then exactly what it is that the fellowship offers.
Right. So in 2013-14 school year, a group of different young men individually reached out and said that they wanted to connect, and some of them were actually thinking about leaving the profession, and so reaching out to us, we started talking, and eventually, instead of all of these one-off conversations, I basically asked them would they be willing to come together. And when they said yes, I also reached out to some friends, some leaders in the city. One of them was Vincent Cobb, who's the co-founder, and we basically had many convenings. Once a month, we'd get together, we'd problem solve, we'd share promising practices. And after a year of that, some of the brothers wanted to reach out, because they had friends who wanted to also be involved and receive the support and collaboration that we had on these monthly basis. And so we did that. And originally we thought maybe 30 people would show up. It ended up being 130 registering and attending our first, what we were called, the Black Male Educators Convening. And from that, it was really exciting. And Superintendent Dr. Height challenged us to not just have a one-off, but to really be there consistently for a larger group than the small number. It was like 15, 17 of us originally. He challenged us to step up and provide support in the city in a different way, a way that was led by practitioners supporting each other. Nationally, there are only 2% of the classroom teachers in America are Black men. And in Philadelphia, it's double that, but still a very small number, 4%. And so we, part of our role, we believe, is not only providing these convenings that we provide professional development, but also the idea of advocacy and support. And we are really trying to elevate the issues that around social justice and around teacher equity and diversity, and the important role that it has not only for Black boys and girls, but also white children also need to see a level of diversity in their K-12 experience. And then lastly, we want to influence the pipeline. And so none of the 17 men who started Black Male Educators started the fellowship. None of us were tapping our shoulders as youth and encouraged to become teachers. And we realized that we all had that in common. So that was really our first commitment, that we were going to share the joys of teaching and elevate the profession with the youth that we mentor, that we teach, that we lead. And we're going to support them in whatever roles they play in society, but we want to make sure that education is a part of the conversations, because they were not for us.
And I just hearing you talking, I know that there are pockets of school districts or areas that actually come together in this movement of the Black educator, male specifically.
Right.
Is there a national movement? Because like in my school district, that's a huge thing. And I'm very familiar with Dr. Hyde. He was actually a superintendent here where I am, so I'm very familiar with him. But I know our school district is really pushing that. You have the convening there. Is there a national collaboration that's done, because it's so important and we're better together? So what's happening with that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversations and collaborations nationally. As you mentioned, we had our inaugural National Black Male Educators Convening this past October. There were 700 plus people there 500 of them Black male educators that districts supported in getting here, and they were from as far as Seattle, Washington, and California and Texas, and met brothers from Nebraska and Oklahoma. So really from all over the country who came to Philadelphia last October. We're already making plans for next year's convening. But in between there we had this hashtag the day after, and really was just about talking about like what are different ways that people were left inspired, and not that they weren't doing any things before, but that they were redoubling their efforts or making recommitments to push the diversity and support students. But at the end of the day, what we're really collaborating around is educational justice, and what are all the different ways that social justice can be pushed and addressed through our classrooms and schools. So one project that we're collaborating nationally, where there's a group here in Philadelphia, Caucus of We and Teachers Action Group, and many others. We are supporting and helping with the National Week of Action for Black Lives Matter in schools. And so that will be February 5th through the 10th. And there's cities, schools, districts all around the country who are going to collaborate with the Black Lives Matter movement in our schools for that week, February 5th through the 10th. And of course, like any month, February is Black History Month, but really every month is Black History Month, and every week is Black Lives Matter week. So making sure that we are raising the consciousness level, making sure that educators are approaching the work with the equity and justice lens, not just, oh, I'm here to teach. No, you're here to help raise freedom fighters and help address inequities that have been involved in public education ever since its founding.
Wow, and I would be remiss if I did not really dive into Black Lives Matter just a little bit.
Sure.
You brought it up, and so really with the whole movement of Black Lives Matter, how has that impacted education?
Yeah, I think in many ways, when you're talking about Black Lives Matter, you're talking about youth, you're talking about the children, and we're talking about, this struggle is really a continuation that happened from our forefathers, and we stand on their shoulders, and we have to continue to do that. But the idea of Black Lives Matter, we're talking about things like police brutality. We're talking about the over-policing in schools. We're talking about the marginalization of children. We're making sure that students are able to connect the dots between the Philadelphia protests, when over 3,500 high school students walked out of class, the protest only to be attacked by Frank Rizzo and the police department of Philadelphia. That was in 1967. And we see that, 50 years later, these things are still occurring. And so Black Lives Matter movement, helps to connect the dots, but also help not only for students' awareness, but also the lessons to be learned from activism in the past, and how we should continue that thread until, victory is at hand.
So how, in your opinion, urban school districts really have some significant challenges that perhaps suburban schools do not, and even rural. It's just a different set of challenges that we have in urban school districts. Being that the movement with black male educators, and I always have to make sure I emphasize that the black male educator is really a key component to really moving things forward, because that is the black male is the one that has the least percentage of visibility in our school district across the nation.
Right.
So how can we, for number one, get more black males into the classroom, into these universities, getting this teacher certification? What are you all doing specifically to try to do that, perhaps at the high school level, or before they even go into college to decide on their major? Is there a concerted effort in reaching high school students going into college?
Yeah, so there's a couple things I think that we're doing, that people are doing around the country. So when we talk about high school, I think we really have to look at a continuum. Are people having conversations with students in high school around education, becoming an educator, and really talking about teaching? That it's teaching, yes. There's also the idea of leading a classroom. And are we talking to those who demonstrate leadership in different ways and saying like, hey, you know what? Have you thought about adding a content to this content expertise and leading and your leadership skills? And if you have relationship building, those are the three legs to the stool in order to do that. But then we're also having conversations with college students and potential career changers, but just not waiting till you graduate from college before someone says, hey, have you ever considered leading a classroom? For the 17 of us that started the fellowship, we were all approached after we graduated from college. So our first commitment was to have those conversations at a very young age. We have a what we call a Why I Teach tour, where some of the teachers we will, from our organization, go to local high schools and universities and have conversations about like, this is the reason why I teach, this is the impact that I'm having, this is how I believe in addressing some of the inequities and injustices that I see. Other things that we're having conversation about is just really giving exposure. So providing, allowing and supporting college students to be mentors to high school students, just so many people have not experienced school since they've been in school themselves. And so making sure that they understand like what it's like, what's happening. And the other areas that we're doing is really around policy and having conversations with policymakers around how to support the idea of diversity in our schools and in our districts and in our classrooms. So those are just some of the things that we're doing. We have a website that people are, we have a membership drive. The website is 1000times2025.org. So that's the number 1000x2025.org. And we're also, just the idea of elevating the profession through positive imagery as well. There's so many conversations about how hard teaching is and why it's, there's these negative connotations around teaching. But what that sends is the message that there's negative connotation around teaching our youth. And we want to flip that on the head and really make sure that we're sharing the joys of it, the wins, the immense wins that educators and children have, and the collaboration that's necessary in our villages. Like what does it take to really elevate communities? Yes. You can't do it without a strong education foundation. So those are all the things that we're continuously having conversations around.
Okay, great. And there's a question from the comment section from Principal Dana Tutt. She says, can you share a high leverage strategy to align low will and high skill in faculty in turnaround schools?
Say that one more time. Low will, high skill?
Yep, low will, high skill in faculty in turnaround school. What is a high leverage strategy to align that?
The number one strategy for that is hiring well. Those are things that you want to try to weed out in the hiring practice. Actually, when we're hiring people, we're actually looking for, optimal situation is high will and high skill. But if it's anything, I'd rather have somebody with the right mindset about our youth and the work that we're doing and coach them up as far as the skill, and the content level. But without the right mindset, it's a ship with a hole in the hull. Like that's pernicious, it's contagious, and it does real damage to students. And we talk about this a lot. Like, we don't just want more Black men. We want men who are conscious, high levels of consciousness, and with a social justice and equity framework as they're approaching this work. So I would say, one, have, we call it, we have this value called straight talk at Mastery and other places, like calling things out that need to be called out and making sure that we're planting the flag of what we believe in and what are the non-negotiables, and making sure that's pervasive around this.
Very good. And thank you. Thank you, Dana, for asking that question. Okay, and so what would be a message you would have to, and I work with new principals and I work with aspiring principals. And so again, anytime that I'm talking with seasoned educators and those with that good information, good knowledge, I always want to get a good message that I can carry to those who aspire, and many who are in very similar situations and turnaround schools, or schools that have, low performance, or, what have you. What would be a message that you would like to leave with them?
Yeah, one of the things that I frequently talk about, and it was also relayed to me, is just one, the principle of lift as you climb. And just because we're leading a classroom or leading a school doesn't mean that we've like arrived at this, in the promised land or anything like that. Like our own personal work continues, but that we're still reaching down and reaching back and supporting those who come behind us, which are our youth. And the other, I think, really important message that has stuck with me over the years that I'll share is that we cannot allow people to give up on our youth too early. Just imagine if Malcolm X was his life ended when he was a teenager, or in his 20s. Like, that would be radically different than the man that we know who ended up being martyred at 39. But there would be people who would give up on him at his lowest points, and that's what we have to make sure that we are bolstering our community to not do, and finding ways to support everybody, because you don't know who these youth will turn into, evolve into. We don't know, and too often we don't know their struggles, we don't know their backgrounds, but we're as educators, we're often too quick to judge. And so not only do we have to protect our children from that, externally as well as internally.
Thank you so much. And where can individuals follow you professionally? Are you on Twitter? Do you have a professional following on Facebook? Where can they follow you?
Yes, I'm on Twitter. It's at El-Mekki, first initial, last name, Selmekki. On Twitter, Facebook, just my name, Sharif El-Mekki. I don't have a professional one, but the fellowship is also on Instagram and Twitter. Our Twitter account is at BMEC Fellowship, and we are also on Facebook as the Fellowship, Black Male Educators for Social Justice.
Okay, awesome. 2 more questions came in for you, so let me ask real quick. So Vanessa Gibson says, it's important to view our children's mistakes as learning opportunity. Actually, it wasn't a question, it was just the comment.
It was an affirmation statement, the exclamation point. Yeah, that's right.
But Principal Tut does have a question. She says, what should female principals do to ensure we are engaging and meeting the needs of Black male teachers? Their voice is often silent in schools full of women. Great question.
Yeah, great question. This is something that we've actually been working with principals on as well. I think we've talked to principals and say like, oh, I support that one Black male teacher that I have in the building. And we're like, how? When, and when they describe the support, it's not that they're not being supportive, but we're saying like, you have to be even more proactive. And so if there's a faculty meeting or there's a policy or there's leadership that they're singularly engaged in a conversation with, because often we may hear the voices of educators, but if you have an only or a very small group, then you should make sure that you're going above and beyond to hear their opinions, to get their feedback, and to make sure that their voice is heard and not overwhelmed by all the other voices and opinions. With Pennsylvania, I think 90-something% of the classroom teachers are white women. So it's very easy to say, yes, I support teachers, but still have muted voices in your schools. And so I would say, like, one, just making sure that you're being proactive and making sure that they are part of conversations that are occurring, both formally and informally, and getting those opinions, and also push them to also engage in different leadership tracks. I would say to make sure that the Black men in your building aren't being used as the mentor for the entire school or the disciplinarian, that they're also being invested in finding out what their aspirations are and investing in those as well. Secretary John King, when we were in the fellowship, when we were in DC, he talked about the idea of the invisible tax that educators of color have, where they ended up being the the disciplinarian or mentoring all the students who look like them, or being the cultural spokesperson for every Black or brown issue that arises. And so just making sure that that's not happening.
Awesome. I just so appreciate your knowledge. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here. So I just truly thank you for taking a part of your evening, because I know it's family time. So I appreciate you taking that time to share with me and all of the viewers and listeners your knowledge and your passion for the Black male educator. I so appreciate that. Thank you.
No, thank you for having me. I also hope that people can. I have some of these conversations on my blog, Philly's Seventh Ward. That's PHILLYS, the number 7 THWARD. So philly's7thward.org. And looking forward to continuing our conversations, and hopefully October you can broadcast and do a show from the National Black Male Educators Convening.
Oh, that sounds awesome. That sounds, let's definitely connect with that. Let's definitely do that. Thank you so much, Sharif. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor. I appreciate it.
Viewers and listeners, thank you as always. We are right here every Tuesday at 8 o'clock for Leadership Matters, because what leadership in fact does matter. I'm Dr. Sharon H. Porter, educator, author, entrepreneur, and speaker, saying until next time, have a wonderful evening. Thank you all.